I mean, honestly, man, sometimes just relax and enjoy the movie. Unleash your inner child and shit. It's a fantasy movie and a cool one at that. It's a series of books and the end of this movie sets up for a sequel, and I really hope the sequel gets made. Scott Pilgrim has taught me that awesome does not mean success. I swear to God, if this movie becomes like the Scott Pilgrim scenario...
No.
What makes a movie great? I'm not the first to say, but I think it's clearly obvious that these days we're spoiled for choice. Netflix, Amazon Prime, Peacock, HBO Max, Stan, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, Universal Plus, Warner Bros. Plus, and a million different other ones that look and sound like someone smashed their keyboard to come up with an imaginary word and then made it the name of their streaming service. It's easy to spot movies that absolutely fail in all senses of the word. There are a million different video essays on YouTube made by people who look exactly the same as me, discussing why they think all of the Transformers movies are trash in a video that's 5 hours long and still only somehow part 1 of 2. On the other hand, it's easy to spot the classics of cinema and TV, top 10 lists, biographies, interviews for these gems available on YouTube, just besides some more video essays discussing that what makes Django Unchained the true classic it is actually lies within Quentin Tarantino's glorious Australian accent.
Shut up, Black.
If you're like me and have partly cultivated your entire opinion on movies based on these video essays, then you can easily pick out which movies are the good ones and which ones are the bad ones. This one is good. This one is bad. Masterpiece, mistake. Essential viewing, easy pass. God tier, trash. However, when having this real binary worldview when it comes to movies, it's really easy to forget one essential thing. Most movies are just okay. These are the movies that skip both spectrums of the video essay. These are the movies that GQ skips when an actor or director is talking about their iconic work. These are the movies that never won an Oscar but didn't win any Razzies either. They neither reach new heights nor explore the tortured depths of the cinematic experience, and are the movie equivalent of a roller coaster that hovers only 10 feet above the ground at a brisk pace. These movies are passable. With that said, let's talk about Zack Snyder's 2010 animated feature, Legend of the Guardians: The Hours of Ga'Hoole. Unironically one of my favorite childhood movies of all time. This movie was a fantasy epic, or fepic if you will, about Soren, a barn owl who gets kidnapped and put to slavery. Once he escapes, he finds the fabled Guardians of Legend that the title's subtitle informs you about. It was produced by Warner Bros. And hometown heroes Animal Logic, who had previous success with George Miller's Oscar-winning film Happy Feet. It was based on a 15-part fantasy novel series directed towards young teenagers who weren't cool enough to read Warriors, written by Lasky. When released in late September of 2010, critics and audiences alike met the movie with an overwhelming, well, it's okay. The movie didn't make all of the money, and so it was swept under more financial and critical successes of that year, such as How to Train Your Dragon, and was also later overshadowed by another DreamWorks movie with the exact same name, just with the verb switched out at the start. Speaking on a non-emotional objective level, I would say that this movie is okay. Its story on the surface is inoffensive, the action is tolerable, the voice acting fits, and the animation is a clear standout. It isn't a terrible movie. 2010 had other offerings that year to fill that void. The Last Airbender makes this movie look like Citizen Kane in comparison. And if we're going to take the time to trash that movie, let it be known that it won Worst Picture of the Year, and also Worst Eye-Gouging Misuse of 3D, which was an award they had only for that year. Meanwhile, Legend of the Guardian simply had a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 5 out of 10, a simple offering that entertains but does not inspire, a unanimous opinion held by all during its release. It's one of those movies that isn't great, neither terrible, and so nobody talks about it. Enter stage right, 10-year-old me. You see, 10-year-old me was excited for this movie. I was so excited for this movie, I remember watching the trailer for the very first time in the cinema. That trailer was so good to me that I remember watching the trailer and not the movie we were actually seeing that day. That's how impactful this Owl movie was to me. I saw glorious visuals, fun fight sequences, all cut with Jared Leto passionately screaming in the background, and the only 30 Seconds to Mars song I can actually remember. On an emotional level, this movie is nothing but a cinematic classic. And I mean that. When actually watching the movie in the theater, 10-year-old me had the best time. Easily, out of all of the times, I was having the best one. No contest. The quirky characters lurched out to me, the visuals excited me, and the music has become so essential that even one snippet of it makes me think about how Google legitimately used to think that this was an album by Smash Mouth, and I have absolutely no idea why. It was one of the most engrossing theater experiences I've ever had, even despite the crying baby 2 rows in front of us because one of the audience members was a new mother who decided to go watch a fantasy movie for some reason. It made such an impression not only on me, but my older brother, that we both patiently waited for the movie to come out on DVD at our local Video Easy store, which is something that we used to do, because it was 2011. I even remember the month it came out on DVD. It was February. We got this Blu-ray not too long after. Oh my god, what a fact! My older brother then started to read the book series it was based on and would tell me how the story continued in the later book titles, which made me excitedly await for the sequel, which still never exists. Later, when I was in the 8th grade and completely friendless, I gave the book series a shot and I became obsessed all over again. It seemed to hit me at the right time, and unlike the Harry Potter books, which I tried to read, I actually ended up finishing the whole story. I had become a fan of the franchise, which, if you haven't been paying attention, should be completely impossible.
And believe me, I spent a lot of time going, blimey, that's very good animated feathers, which means that the story wasn't working. It seemed terribly long.
Because it's actually true. There are better fantasy series to get in love with bigger fan bases. Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Percy Jackson. What am I doing with this owl movie?
Legends of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole. That's fair, they didn't think that title through.
It got reviews like this by Mark Commode, and it's so conflicting because Mark's not an idiot. He's seen more movies than I have. I should trust his opinion more than I do my own.
So the story, it's like sub-Star Wars, post-Potter, Lord of the Rings like wannabe watership down, mythical, anthropomorphic, mythological story with owls.
With owls? How dare they? Why is it like that? Why is it that I liked it so much and continued to like it despite the fact that nobody else around me connected to it? What is it that I see in the movie that critics like Mark Commode don't? Why do I see something great in a product that's simply okay? To find out, let's begin at the very start. This is the About the Author section at the end of every Guardians of Ga'Hoole novel. Catherine Lasky has had a long fascination with owls. Several years ago, she began doing extensive research about these birds and their behaviors. She thought that she would someday write a non-fiction book about owls illustrated and photographed by her husband, Christopher Knight. She realized, though, that this would indeed be difficult, since owls are shy nocturnal creatures. So she decided to write a fantasy book about a world of owls. It is not the common origin for most fantasy series.
I was going to have him photograph it, and he said, forget it. He said, owls are endangered. They operate at night mostly. This is going to be a very hard photo book to do. Why don't you do a fantasy?
It's kind of like if George R. R. Martin tried to write his own non-fiction history book about the War of the Roses, but later discovered that nobody took pictures back then because cameras weren't invented yet, and so we couldn't have any satisfying visuals, and so we decided he might as well just revolutionize the genre of fantasy because he doesn't have anything better to do. The novels it's based on, Guardians of Ga'Hoole, is an interesting underrated series when it comes to young fantasy, and I really feel that Catherine Lasky is special in the way that she really seems so ordinary.
Oh, hi.
She was just someone who happened to write books that had an idea that morphed into an even bigger idea and kept going from there.
When I started on book one, when I wrote the proposal for book one, it was for one book. I only envisioned one book. Was this the luxury of having this 6-book arc, then went into, 15 books to develop it.
One book turned into a trilogy, which turned into 6, which then turned into 15 entries and spin-offs to boot. This whole book series sort of became an accidental epic.
Ga'Hoole was created over time. It did not spring from my forehead like a child of Zeus. It was bit by bit added on to, and it got richer and richer.
And it's fun watching her as she navigated the process of it becoming a movie.
I have to tell you, that was really a surprise. You come encumbered with all these ideas about Hollywood, and I quickly was rid of them from the get-go, the first meeting.
Her husband, Christopher Knight, the one that wouldn't take any of the photographs, has a YouTube channel, and you could really tell that this is a personal YouTube channel because it's definitely run by someone who's old. You've got videos like Kathy in Hollywood, followed by the sequel, Kathy in Hollywood 2. And then the trilogy is completed with Kathy in Hollywood 2. All are the same video of her going to the world premiere. Even though the movie wasn't a critical or financial success, she still keeps memorabilia of it everywhere, and I feel like she doesn't really regret ever having doing it.
There are posters from the movie, which I love.
Her series is a mainstay in that specific fantasy subgenre where it's all animal focused. Stories where all of the protagonists are animals and no humans are to be seen, like the previously mentioned Warriors, which I hear is very straightforward and easy to follow, and Wings of Fire, which I know nothing about. Guardians of Garhul as a series exists in this weird area of being really influential and unique to readers, including myself, yet seeming overly redundant of other fantasy titles. When the movie came out, people were quick to talk about how much of a ripoff it was to Star Wars. Same wide-eyed youth, same great evil, same weapon of mass destruction, basically was a knockoff just with owls. Except that it wasn't, because that's an extremely surface level and vapid take. To get you up to speed, here's a quick synopsis of the books that they actually decided to adapt for the screen, that being The Capture, The Journey, and The Rescue, the first 3 books of the series. You have Soren falling out of the family hollow after his little sister is just hatched. He's taken to St. Aggie's, narrowly escaping brainwashing with his new friend Gylfi after they cheat the system with their own intelligence, and retelling old legends that Soren's father told him. Legends about a great tree in the middle of the Sea of Hulamir, the Guardians of Garhul. A defected guard named Grimble secretly teaches them how to fly so they're able to escape, and they immediately run to a verbose Great Grey named Twilight, who likes to spit raps while he fights people. I'm being completely serious. Soren then returns home only to find it completely abandoned. From here, the 3 decide that they should see if that ancient tree of legend isn't just a story, and instead a real thing that they can go to. Before that though, they run into Soren's blind nursemaid snake, Mrs. P, who doesn't have any eyes and instead indents in the book, which I think was a good change that the movie made, and also Digger, a burrowing owl frantically looking for his parents. After a fight in the desert and some talks with some eagles who inform Digger that he's now mad orphaned, the 5 travelers decide to call themselves the Band, with one purpose: reaching the Great Tree of Garhul. The start of Book 2 is about this journey, aptly titled The Journey. They encounter crows, annoying adults trying to crush their dreams, murderous bobcats, hints at the actual true villain of the story, allusions to Greek myth, and Canada. Once reaching the tree, the story then becomes less of a fantastical journey and more like a Harry Potter book. Swap Hogwarts for Garhul and the mystery of the Chamber of Secrets with the mystery of this new mysterious big bad, and you can see the parallel. 3 more characters are introduced during the lessons, and Soren grows to know his teacher Isarib, who's a bit tattered and slow only because his history as a war hero was so vast and bloody. He then disappears mysteriously. Soren's sister from the first chapter then shows up again as a major amount of young owls are discovered, all brainwashed. The 3rd book, The Rescue, then tells us how Soren, with the friends he's made along the way, cracked that case of this new threat that caused such an occasion. They listen in on parliament meetings when they're not supposed to. They sneak out to talk to a rogue blacksmith, and then go out on their own to save Isarib, using science and the knowledge they've gained to their advantage. They find Isarib, but a battle then breaks out between what is dubbed the Chore of Chores and the Pure Ones, the name of this new grand evil headed by Metalbeak, who just so happens to be Soren's other sibling, Clud, who was so evil he was the one who pushed Soren out of the hollow at the very beginning of the story. And just to add to this evilness, he murdered their parents. So, Son of the Year. They saved the day, and Isarib writes a poem about it. So with that synopsis, you can easily see where the fantasy tropes are very prevalent in the story. Even though it obviously relies on the same trappings of every fantasy story, which is where the Star Wars comparisons lie, there are still themes and ideas that Lasky puts in her stories that you don't see in other big titles. Guardians of Garhul is more concerned about myths and telling myths and how one can learn from them, but also intelligence in the face of ignorance, as well as altruism in the face of cynicism. It's clear that the series, when looking at the themes and ideas that Lasky puts into them, turns out to be quite unique in its own right. On top of this, the books are short and sweet, only around 200 pages each, but she manages to make each one entertaining with a mix of fantasy elements and real-world information about owls.
4 big notebooks that have all my research information on owls.
This is a novel series with a wealth of information, character, theme, and story that would make a great adaptation. So now, let's look at that adaptation. Warner Bros. Had the film rights for the series as early as 2005, only 2 years after The Capture was released. Early on, Lasky was actually pinned to write the screenplay. However, the screenplay ended up being co-written by John Orloff and Emil Stern, and it's here that we can talk about the differences between the books and movie, because given that it's 3 books worth, there's a lot that they had to cover. Not only is it 3 different books, but these 3 books themselves have different tones. The first being a simple prison escape story, the second is half Stand By Me mixed with a religious pilgrimage and half Harry Potter novel, and the third hits the nail with the young adult action-loving crowd as our characters have grown together and learnt enough that they're finally up and using the skills they've acquired in a more action-packed mystery novel. And if you squint at it, you can see why they chose to do 3 different books. You have the inciting incident, the escape, the literal trials and tribulations where Soren not only grows physically strong but mentally as well, and then you have the climax with the 3rd book and the revelation that his brother was the bad guy the entire time. It's an easy 1, 2, 3 through each book. However, given that it is an adaptation, some things just needed to be changed, starting with the title.
Legend of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole.
This title sucks. It just really sucks.
I always hesitate on that title because I don't like it very much, and it was not what I called the movie.
I think sometimes part of the reason this movie might have failed might have just been because of the title. Legend of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole is such a cluttered mess. I have no proof, and yet I know some focus group came up with it. They left the complicated place name last in very small writing, so everyone has their own idea on how to pronounce Ga'Hoole.
Movie Legends of the Guardian, the Owls of Ga'Hoole.
Legends of the Guardian of Ga'Hoole.
Ga'Hoole.
Of Ga'Hoole.
Ga'Hoole.
The Ga'Hoole.
I was gonna call this movie The Legends of the Guardians of Gayhole if it sucked.
Wow, the Owls of Ga'Hoole doesn't hold up as well as I thought.
Ga'Hoole.
I was looking forward to you actually pronouncing the whole thing because I couldn't.
Legend of the Guardians,
how
the Owls of Ga'Hoole. Yeah.
Ga'Hoole.
Ga'Hoole is the mythical tree where the Guardians live.
Forget Ga'Hoole, it is now Ga'Hoole. The main title itself is overly confusing. You don't know what the legends are for these Guardians, which you also don't know, and so it's overly vague. They should have just made the title the same as the book, or, and this is one I actually think is the best option, they should have just made the subtitle for the movie the title for the movie. The Owls of Ga'Hoole would have told you specifically what it's about and where it's about. Ga'Hoole with its apostrophe in the middle of it is an intimidating word, but I think if you had it bigger on the poster, people would eventually learn what it is. And also, Guardians is in so many movie titles these days, it's kind of an overused word, and it just makes it sound like a really average movie. That's because it is. So yes, I think the title is something they should have probably fixed. But let's forget about that. Let's talk about the movie and its changes from the books. Lasky herself actually states that she liked most of the changes.
There's some things that I really wished that I'd thought of. They did this thing, they had a series of drawings about the armor, the battle claws that the owls wear. And I wished I'd seen these drawings when I was writing the book, because I sort of glossed over it. I never kind of explained how they worked. I don't think it's a fair comparison to say how does a book compare to a movie because they're such different entities. I will only say they are so faithful to the spirit of the story and the spirit of the characters.
The most obvious being Soren's age. Enough time passes in the book that Soren goes from around how Eglantine looks in the movie to the age he is in the movie. However, I can see why they didn't do such a thing. Trying to age up the character slowly over the movie would have made it even more confusing. And having him closer to Clud's age in the movie means you have scenes and interactions that you just don't have in the book.
Yeah, you had a head start.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, you did.
Look, I did. You cheated.
It's weird, but Clud and Soren feel more like brothers in the movie than they do in the book. Their relationship in the original being rather one note, where Soren is an inquisitive 2-week-old and Clud hates everything. Here you can at least sense some sort of camaraderie between them.
Nice helmet.
Boys.
On top of this, St. Aggie's and the Pure Ones have been merged into just one entity. This is simply because having two different villains would have been confusing and taken up more time due to both needing proper development. St. Aggie's is then more of a villainous force in the movie than they are in the book as well. Given that less time passes with the movie, the writers also made Clud and Metalbeak two different characters, which has the unintentional effect with scenes like this.
Do you know why, Clud?
It's weirdly cerebral, almost like a dream sequence where Clud is being overtaken by his darker half. Except, no, it's just real and they're just two different characters. Even though others have their own opinions about this change, I still think that it's actually a very intelligent choice. Sometimes you just need a villain that's evil for being evil. In the original book, Metalbeak was always meant to be a shadowy figure no one really knew anything about, so adapting such a character to instead be the shadowy leader that then influences Clud to give into his darker self makes sense.
Metalbeak says the strong will triumph.
A lot of things are just getting truncated. Instead of a subtle type of brainwashing that just turns owls into boring NPCs, the movie version of moon blinking just turns them into zombies. The flecks are far more visually striking than their book counterparts, as well as the climax in general, as the book just has them fighting in the middle of a forest. Speaking of truncating and condensing, a lot of that happens to the characters from the books. A lot of big ones only get glances or single lines, like Bubo.
It could be a weapon, it could be a new shield or armor.
Strixstrummer gets a glance.
Beggars belief to think that these brave owlets would fly here.
I think Julep is in the background here, Primrose is here fighting Twilight, and I think these singers are supposed to make you think about Madame Plonk. A lot just got cut completely. Horton Tender Eagles, Ruby, Martin, Elven Rib, Poot, Trader Mags and Bubbles, the Roguesmith of Silvervale, all important to the book's stories, but just couldn't fit in the movie's runtime. Given that so much has changed here, it's no wonder that a few characters' personalities also change as well. One of these even being Soren's. He's more boisterous and loud than his quieter book counterpart.
And lies of kill.
As said before, Mrs. P has actual eyes, and they never really confirm whether or not she's blind.
Yes, I am.
Isrib is a bit more physically able and aggressive.
Fight you right now.
Order.
Soren, you can judge the winner.
Jat and Jut are now comedically tinged, which makes their serial cannibalism in the book odd to read. Meanwhile, Ochalissa remains completely the same. However, the writers did change her from a spotted owl to a short-eared for apparently no reason. I mean, given that she doesn't really have a lot to do in the movie, you could have easily have just made her Ruby, who is actually a short-eared. Twilight is much older than he is in the book and sings gracefully with a lute, which is just a different viewing of the much younger Twilight in the books that basically battle raps whenever he fights people. None of this, however, compares to the elephant in the room when it comes to character changes, Digger.
An ambush! Well, I bet you didn't count on this.
Hawks don't make a quick lunch of you, then the buzzards will.
Lost!
Hilarious.
Yes, Digger, everyone's favorite hyperactive nutcase, is legitimately not that way when it comes to the book. He's completely different. He's legitimately known for his philosophical musings and calm nature. On top of this, his family in the book is murdered and his little brother is eaten by Jat and Jut, the eccentric guys from the start. But, much like the differences to Clud, I welcome these. I think the only thing they needed to do with Digger was give him an extra dimension, which you could easily do with his book counterpart. You could easily read such a character as someone dealing with their extremely traumatic past by completely ignoring it.
Yes, I kind of am.
And the fact that he looks like someone who would partake in the recreational consumption of marijuana, I wouldn't be surprised if he also got philosophical from time to time and tried to ask what it means to be an owl, which is actually something he asks Soren in book 2. Apart from changing characters' personalities, the writers also pulled from future books and invented new characters to make the story more cohesive. The finished movie has the soothsaying echidna, who is just as odd and just as nameless as a soothsaying web-reading rabbit that appears around books 7 and 8. And once again, I still love this scene. This exact moment from the movie is the thing I endlessly quote. On an unapologetic level, 'twas foretold is how I enter a room.
'Twas foretold. 'Twas foretold. 'Twas foretold. Foretold. Now go. I do, doubter. 'Twas foretold. Are you a snake?
Yes, I am.
The navigator who doubts. It was foretold that...
'Twas foretold! Naira was actually a character that was introduced in book 4, but she was always around during the timeline of the first 3 books. So this change actually makes a lot of sense to me because she's actually kind of the real villain of the entire story.
Pure ones, fall back to me!
I already talked about Metalbeak, but then you also have Alamir, a complete movie invention. He actually turns out to be a traitor or turnfeather who sells out the Guardians in order to rule the tree, leading to this Star Wars reference I think they intentionally made.
It's a trap.
So actually there's a lot of fundamental changes from the books to the movie. But unlike other adaptations where it seems oddly perplexing on why the writers would decide to make such a change, these ones seem to make sense to me. These weren't changes they made because they didn't understand the source material or just didn't care. The writers changed it to suit the world they were trying to create. The movie version of Gahul is ever so slightly more extra than what Lasky has. There are a ton of different characters in this movie you would call eccentric. Jat and Jut are now British guys who talk about the different intimidating faces they can make.
Oh, impressive.
You like it?
Yeah.
The echidna is some eccentric ethereal land animal that's somehow in charge of these sky birds and seems to be some sort of angel for the great tree, even though he literally can't even when he sees a snake. Digger and Twilight are more bright and hyperactive versions of themselves, and then Metalbeak just revels in the fact that he's the movie's bad guy.
You have my word.
Metalbeak just loves being evil. On a primal level, being a dick does feel good.
You should know, Alamir, there is only room for one king.
That is a man that goes, oh yes, I'm evil. The most interesting change has to be what they did with Clud. Have you ever watched a film based on something you like and then there's this one character that has an arc that you enjoy and yet the adaptation completely skips over it, making the character extremely one-note and boring? Clud is exactly like that, except it's in reverse. The movie version of Clud is somehow more complicated than the book version of Clud. To me, that's like a total rarity when it comes to adaptations. In the book, you only see him for the first 2 chapters, in which he complains about everything and is extremely demeaning. He then promptly disappears from the story and then shows back up at the end of book 3 and is now Darth Vader. For the next 3 books, he spends the entire time being super evil. The movie version has at least more going on. You could see that he is egotistical.
I'm gonna be the best flyer. That's because Tydo's the best at everything.
Competitive.
Well done.
Beginner's luck.
And unempathetic, which leads to Naira and Metalbeak being able to warp those bad sides of him into something way worse.
What?
Now there's a soldier.
His cynicism grows into just plain hatred.
You're just weak, Soren. Still living in your dreams.
It's not complex or life-changing, but it is understandable. He found his people. They just happen to be super racist. And you can tell that this is what they were going for with the character, because the dialogue is extremely... well, you need to listen to it, really.
Yes, the only proof I have of my words. My words were the only proof I ever had that you were real. Well, still I believed.
The movie's dialogue is a lot like the prequels.
They believe in me like no one else ever has. From my point of view, the Jedi are evil.
I don't think there's a moment that really compares to the I like sand part in episode 2, but it's still cut from the same cloth. The movie's dialogue is completely and utterly serious, and it's something that I actually love about it. There's a large trend in movies in which they all have to be self-aware and ironic. Marvel movies deflect with bathos. Even recent Star Wars movies now try and comment on vacuous plot holes that don't really mean anything, such as the exhaust port from the Death Star and Chewie's missing metal because believing in your past choices is for some reason now for suckers. A lot of movies these days have been ones that just collect random IP and then comment on their own shortcomings, and because of this, it's hard to really buy that this is a world in of itself that you're just peeking into. It becomes apparent that what you're watching really is some screenwriter who's insecure about the movie getting a bad rap on an honest trailer or CinemaSins video.
You can't be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man if there's no neighborhood. Okay, that didn't really make sense, but you know what I'm trying to say.
The best thing about Legend of the Guardians' dialogue is that it follows George Lucas's method of just writing exactly what you mean.
We thought of it as an epic.
Say what you will about wooden dialogue. It may not sound pretty or complex, but what it loses in finesse, it gains in impact and brevity. There's no ironic vein in this movie's body.
I think Da has filled it with stories and dreams.
There's nothing wrong with dreams.
Soren may be similar to a lot of other protagonists, but the movie takes itself so seriously you have to go along with it. You could also say that about Soren talking to Eglantine about the Guardians being real.
You know, Da's stories, they're true. They're all true.
Or Clud's turn to evil.
A pity there won't be any Guardians left after today.
Which may feel overly sudden to some. Just like some other angsty rebel who flirts with a former ally and then perishes in a pit of fire and emerges as a masked, inhumane version of himself. I swear this isn't a rip-off of Star Wars. It may be overly simple and straightforward, but it's exactly that reason that 10-year-old me found it so effective. And that effect still carries to this day. There's some merit in being truthful to what you're writing about, and I can't help but find that truthfulness commendable.
You know, my head said to do one thing while my gizzard was saying to do another.
I don't care if the dialogue sucks or is overly simple. What I like to care about is the fact that that seriousness actually carries over.
And you trusted your head? That's when you failed.
A really good video by So Uncivilized is about the straightforwardness of Star Wars' story. In it, he discusses that the reason it's so easy to follow as a trilogy is because each scene easily leads to the next.
Every new idea is introduced in context of what came before. And this isn't just a feature of the opening sequence. The whole movie is like this.
You see St. Aggie's when Soren sees it. You see Garhul when Soren sees it.
Everything else in the movie is introduced through something or someone we already know.
There are no flashbacks or flash forwards or scenes without characters we haven't seen before. Each scene has an easy transition into the next.
Beggars belief to think that these brave owlets would fly here.
Oh. You shall leave immediately. Take your best owls with you, Alamir.
I just hope Alamir finds the owlets.
And a good bath. Gross old owl. Matron's instructed me to give you lot a rundown on the way we do things here. You'll be tapped or selected for a specialized chore. Friends are in there.
Hi!
And this is where it gets really confusing, because people say that it's a complicated mess.
And you do spend a lot of it going, what, pardon? So I think Are the Owls of God. I kind of got lost, to be honest with you.
Are we watching the same movie? This is overly simple.
It seemed terribly long.
One of the things that hurts the film is it's a little short.
Terribly long.
It's a little short. It's a little short.
Terribly long.
This movie was directed by Zack Snyder.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Zack Snyder, director of Legend of the Guardians.
And Zack Snyder is, well, he's Zack Snyder.
And there is a director's cut of that movie that has yet to be released. I'll say that out loud.
He was pinned on to direct, which is a very interesting choice considering he has the track record that he has.
You've traveled to Sparta, you've bent superhero notions in Watchmen, and now everyone wants to know why Owl.
Zack Snyder came on board off of my first draft, and then...
And I actually just saw the paintings, and I said, what is that? And there was just images of these owls with like battle claws and embers flying around. And I kind of was in that head of like sort of ancient battle. And this movie seemed to make sense in sort of Lord of the Rings, you know, with Owl. They were like, oh, it's this animated film. And they were like, you're not interested in this by any chance, are you? And I was like, well, it's kind of cool.
As a director, he is a lot of things. His visual style is flashy, he's always filming at high shutter speeds, and his actors are always very, very serious. He's not shy to slow everything down at a second's notice as well. The most important thing to Zack Snyder is the image, quite literally. They say every frame a painting, or Snyder's frames literally look like paintings, even though all of them besides Guardians is live action. When it comes to Snyder, the most interesting thing about this movie is the fact that it was an animated kids film, and he directed 300. That marriage was always going to create something strange. However, I think there are some positives to his inclusion. It was obvious that he, much like the writing, was going to give the world of the story a level of seriousness.
You know, we both started off from a point of wanting to make a very realistic film, and sort of a darker film than what Pixar and DreamWorks have sort of been doing in animation.
I wanted to take the world 100% seriously. I wasn't making this movie going, you know, it's a kid's movie, so don't worry about it or whatever.
Do you think the Legend of the Guardians is able to transcend the perception of animated films being just for kids, and in what ways?
We didn't try and make a movie that was either just for kids or just for adults. We just wanted to get Catherine's stories into this film.
Not only did he not simmer his own tendencies down, but he approached the movie as if it were a live-action movie.
The way we did it was, I told him, I said, listen guys, first meeting, I don't know how to make an animated movie, come on.
But like in a good way, and not the really messed up way that Jon Favreau did with the Lion King remake.
And pitched them on a vision of how we could present this in a way that felt more in the style of a documentary.
He didn't want to create something that looked like it was a documentary here. No, he wanted to make the animators approach the movie as if they were filmmakers making a live-action film.
Those guys could tell me everything about animation, but what I could help them with was my experience as a cinematographer and as a camera operator, and got cameras and dollies and actually had the experience of operating to see what it felt like.
Working with real equipment to bring that quality back to the CG world.
We basically had training in real handheld 35mm cameras, the real physicality of what it actually feels like to be in a chair and having to, really use all of your weight to be able to throw the camera around.
This approach led to shots where it feels like the camera is actually being affected by the environment of the animation, such as subtle wobbles.
Filming the owl flying, it's buffeted by the same wind that's buffeting the subject. So it's not just like, and the camera and the bird flies in it. The camera also is flying too, so it's difficult to design that into the way you make an animated film, because I basically tell them to be a slightly bad operator. It shouldn't land clean on them. There should be a little teeny adjustment. Camera should constantly be trying to anticipate where the character is going to go.
And these digital zooms. And unlike Man of Steel, which he would make a few years later, he didn't overuse this effect. There are a few digital zooms, but they aren't distracting. And honestly, it pulls me in.
We get a stunt team involved, and they actually put on like little cardboard claws and humans dressed up as owls fighting, and that's how we learned how to sort of animate our owls and construct some of these battle scenes.
I was teaching them how I would make a live action movie, and they were teaching me how to make an animated movie, and the movie kind of ended up kind of meeting in the middle.
When it comes to his tendencies with slow motion, from the first shot you know it's going to have quite a bit of it. Quite literally. The first shot is slow motion. As well as 3D! 3D, everybody! Guys, you remember 3D? Absolutely revolutionized cinema! Everyone's still talking about 3D 12 years later. Woo! And now that you've tried to educate the animators in this sort of live-action sense, let's talk about the animation. Do I even really need to mention the animators? You know it's perfect. There's a simple question that you need when it comes to Legend of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole, and it's, do you have eyes? Because if you have eyes, you're able to watch this movie and realize just how impressive this animation is. This was 2010. Barack Obama was in his first term as president during this. 1989 was only 21 years ago. Now it's like 56. Time has passed relentlessly, and yet this film still looks so good. Not only does it look really good, but the film doesn't sacrifice its own expressiveness because of it.
So what we did is we took natural movements that they might do, like bow their head, and there's not a lot of expression change on their face, and here you have that beautiful side light and backlight.
The Lion King remake is a really good comparison for where this sort of approach can go wrong. Jon Favreau was so obsessed with creating a movie that looked so real that none of the animals have any expression to them. I mean, even from the first shot, you know that the realism is taking over the expression of the world. With Garhul, they don't do that. They still change the rules of our reality to fit the reality of this animated world. Barn owls physically just have really brown eyes that look dark black. This would have meant that Soren looked like death healed over if he had completely black eyes. Editing Soren's eyes adds expression because this is the main character of our story, and it's pretty important that you connect with him. How about the fact that all of the owls use their eyes independently of their heads, which also doesn't happen in nature?
Owls' eyes are rod-shaped and act as binocular telescopes. They are not eyeballs.
An owl's eyes are shaped like tubes, and they're held in place by bones called sclerotic rings.
Look how calm she is as well.
Turning their whole head is the best option.
If you think about it, owls are actually freak shows. It means that shots like this just wouldn't happen. And given this balance of expression mixed with realism, it means you can have the audio for the movie off and you can still tell what the characters are thinking. You can tell what he's thinking, and you can tell what she's thinking. And you can tell who's brooding in the corner. There are so many different emotions you can read on the owls' faces, which is surprising because these are owls. And it's because of all this work that the animators did that the animation is basically a 10 out of 10 objectively.
I was just blown away. I've never seen animation like it. Honestly.
But if you can't...
Whenever the movie does come up, everyone's talking about the animation. But there are other parts of the movie I think are just as good. They just happen to be less flashy. I mean, marry this animation with some great production design. What people who haven't read the source material probably don't know is just how much of the world of the movie is created solely by the movie and is not translated from the books.
And I wished I'd seen these drawings when I was writing the book.
These flags at St. Aggie's add some much needed color. There's a bigger emphasis on St. Aggie's as it being some sort of historical place that the owls decided to move into. Something you can't really understand, but surely feel. The drawing in Soren's family hollow at the beginning visually tells you how important the Guardians are to him, as well as his hanging ornaments out at the front, and the inclusion makes the hollow feel more homely. The weapons and helmets of the Guardians themselves are also inventions of the movie. Sure, they have battle claws in the books, but the Guardians don't wear these masks as uniforms in the book that are a very striking visual. And I love those Talon swords, and I wish they were in the book. Speaking of the Guardians, most of the Great Tree is just stuff made up for the movie. These wooden-made walkways, the waterfall that actually doesn't make any sense if you think about the logic of the tree, and this introductory island, the knickknacks and objects all seen around the place, these aren't described or focused on in the book whatsoever. The only thing I don't like about the tree is that we can't explore more of it. If the movie were longer and traced more of the book's story, you would see all of the different corners of the tree. The production designers of course need some credit here, because their efforts I think have majorly been overlooked. But I also think there's one part of this movie and one person that is severely overlooked when it comes to this movie. To me, the ultimate underdog of this film is David Hirschfielder, the film's composer. People have raved on about the film's amazing animation and mentioned the engaging production design before, but no one has talked about the music. Can we talk about that theme song? Somewhere between Pirates of the Caribbean, Batman, and Lord of the Rings, in a way that you can tell that it's trying to be like those scores, but you wouldn't ever get it confused with those scores.
We're gonna find the Guardians of Garhul.
Clearly, once again, Hirschfielder, like the production designers and like the writers before him, are at least treating the world with a level of seriousness. It isn't going for straight whimsy like out of a typical family movie, but it's also not going for something foreboding and ominous either. It strikes that perfect middle, always heightened by what Hirschfielder is putting under it. And it will always be a complete mystery to me on why Google thought that this soundtrack was made by the same people who made All Star. Like, I know Smash Mouth are basically the modern version of the Beatles, but this is not how you respect David Hirschfielder. I'm always one to confuse Walking on the Sun with the Guardian theme. Oh yeah, All Star sounds exactly like theatrical music made for a fantasy film. The audacity! When it comes to music that isn't actually created by David Hirschfielder, there are a few songs that are just added to the soundtrack. This fight scene of Soren basically finishing his hero's journey arc has the same song from the end of The Mist, and that's why I'll always think of, owls when I hear it, and not one of the most depressing movie endings of all time. But that's the sacrifices I make in service of the Owl movie. Then there's also the major outlier of the soundtrack, and you would know what I'm talking about if you've listened to it. It's the Owl City song. The year previous, Adam Young, aka Owl City, became immediately popular with his worldwide #1 song, Fireflies, which is a certified hood classic and no one can tell me otherwise. Given that this movie was already in production, they obviously struck a deal with this new pop star for him to write a great tune for the movie. Adam actually did quite a few and it was a real trend for him. So why would they choose to do such a thing? Easy! It's a song by Owl City, and this is a movie about an Owl City. I mean, it was written in the stars. Except when you think about the fact that this is supposed to be some sort of timeless fantasy epic. And To the Sky is definitely a synth-pop song from the 21st century. Now, the thing is, I love Owl City's first 3 albums. They're absolute synth-pop jams. But I really think that maybe it should have become diegetic or something like that. Because this is like if you were watching Star Wars and then suddenly the Bee Gees started playing through the Millennium Falcon. It's like, I get it, disco was popular at the time, but this is a fantasy movie, and we're trying to create something timeless here. I think the song is great, and I think the movie is great, but you wouldn't marry these two things together. It's just a strange complexion, because this is about Arthurian owls of legend, and he makes music with synths. I mean, they transitioned to the montage with the Owl City song by having Twilight playing his lute, for God's sake.
He's actually pretty good, you know. Oh, I guess. If you like that sort of thing.
Just have him sing the song to the group in that scene. You would still have the song written in it, but you would also have it make sense and have it fit the fantasy genre you have going. As it sits, it's just extremely, extremely awkward. It basically means that in the middle of this fantasy movie, there's a music video for Owl City. Forgetting about the pop song that's attached to the movie, what I truly believe about the production design, the writing, and the music is that all these 3 things come together in a real perfect way.
Just imagination and, sitting around talking about it all the time. What would be cool? Talking to Zack, talking amongst ourselves.
So excited about everything, and he's the most enthusiastic guy, and he's just got all these ideas, and he's just fantastic, and he's really collaborative.
Ryan, what drew you to the role, and what guidance were you given about how to create your owl voice?
Well, you gave me absolutely no guidance.
Zero guidance.
Straightforward, simple dialogue, heightened imagery, and an emotionally charged score is the reason that so many moments of the movie can still be impactful to me, even if other portions of the film falter. There are brief instances throughout the film where no plot or story is happening and you're able to just watch the visuals with the music. Snyder really lets Hirschfielder have the moment here. Moments like Noctis's flight at the beginning of the movie, arriving at St. Aggie's for the first time, Jat and Jut joining the other kidnappers. You get the vibe of what they're going for really well, and I think it works. Like, for some reason, I remember the specific sound Clud makes when he decides to not follow Soren into the Pelatorium. Or this shot of Naira. Or this moment when Soren realizes how evil Clud's become.
Then you don't know me at all.
Yeah, I agree, these moments are exceedingly simple and straightforward, but sometimes that's all you really need. Snyder still leaves his fingerprints everywhere as well. I thought Alamir was the size of a mountain with the weight of this shot. You've also got this trademark back and forth between slow motion and normal speed during the climax. Like, a shot like that to me is straight up Zack Snyder. But I also like that there are instances in which Snyder's Snyderisms actually sort of help the movie. Jaime Toot has a good point in his video where he says that this shot of Soren not only emphasizes 3D everybody, but also visually displays the disbelief that Soren is feeling at the fact that he's flying for the very first time. Everyone points to this rain scene, and for good reason. It's one of the most visually striking moments of the movie. It has Soren learn to trust his own gizzard and fly through the weather currents. But what people don't really understand that this is basically an adaptation of chapter 17 from book 2, Weatherchore, in which Soren basically does the exact same thing. Instead of describing everyone's actions like Lasky has to do through the medium of a novel, Snyder tries to tell you how Soren is feeling through the visuals. The mixture of calmness and fear that you would have during such a moment, and also how he eventually gets lost in it by the end. So looking back, there are still very effective moments of this movie that stick with me. And it's a mixture of Snyder's direction, Hirschfielder's music, the expressiveness of the character, and the production of the world.
You know, your evil stare reminds me a little of my intimidator.
There's something wrong with your face, Judd.
No.
Some of you will be pickers.
Oh, no, I don't want to be a picker.
Just because it's sung doesn't make it a song.
No, we can't just leave them down there writhing in pain, can we?
What difference does it make?
However, there might be a reason that this movie is very special to me specifically. That reason might just be the voice acting. And the reason it's the voice acting is because it's weirdly Australian.
And found out he was Australian, was like, oh my gosh, no way, how can he be Australian? I thought he was from the South. And so that was cool. When you hear him speak with his real accent, you're like, that's awesome.
Dived into that world of owls. I never once sort of thought that I was playing an animated character.
I would have put a bit more youth and kind of enthusiasm into my voice. And also he's Australian too. So
In pre-production, the film found its way to Animal Logic, an Australian-founded visual effects and animation studio known for doing the title bumpers for Adam Hill's popular musical trivia show Spicks and Specks, and nothing else. I'm kidding, they're more known for George Miller's Happy Feet, which won Best Animated Feature the year of its release, and also the Lego Movie. They mainly do animation for Warner Bros, but then also have done a lot of VFX work for Marvel as well. Either way, when Orloff and Stern started writing the script, the studio started casting the movie. And unlike other films and TV shows that are made in Australia but are still set in America, Snyder and everyone else decided that such a country can easily become the backdrop for the movie. Production design quickly adapted the looks and feel of the Tasmanian wilderness, which is why the Tasmanian devil attacks Soren and Clud at the beginning of the movie, and the casting for the movie immediately looked not too far for talent. Because of this, a movie created by an American corporation, directed by an American director, based off a book series created by an American author, which mainly deals with owls found in North America, became Australian.
Oh, nice hunting.
You hadn't caught it. It wasn't his moth.
What difference does it make?
My friend's hurt.
We didn't.
There are 5 of us.
And when it comes to actors, this movie is aggressively Australian sometimes. Grimble and Noctis are both voiced by Hugo Weaving. Geoffrey Rush plays Ezra, Joel Edgerton as Metalbeak, Ryan Quanten again as Clud. You've got Sam Neill, who's technically Kiwi, who plays Alamir, Anthony LaPaglia as Twilight, David Wenham as Digger, and Bill Hunter, who's been in basically any Australian movie that has had international success apart from Mad Max, voices Bubo. So now Bubo from the books will always sound like Muriel's dad to me.
It could be a weapon. It could be a new shield or armor.
Here's a representation of what I hear. Dead coals ain't going to do me a bit of good, young'uns. No sense flying in here with a great lot of ashes. Cold as Glocks knows what. You know you got to look for the blue and the flame, and then this is the hardest. A tinge of green around the blue. Now, because of the movie, I just see him as a bogan. The rest of the cast is filled out by English talent. Miriam Margolyes is Mrs. P. Helen Mirren voices Naira and does a great job of reflecting her spiteful rage. Both Gylfi and Soren are British actors doing Australian accents, so hats off to them for getting the twang down. You don't know how rare that is.
And now he's got to get this Australian thing going and everything.
It's hard to do, by the way.
Yeah, he was telling me you got to go.
Mixed up with the Australian accent where they go up after everything they say, and it just sort of seems to work okay.
Hey, what happened?
Then there's Eglantine, who's the odd one out because she's American.
Soren, we're not at home, are we?
There's a simple reason for this, however. She's voiced by the only person who can truly capture the spirit of Eglantine, one of the producer's daughters.
It was super fun, because I got to say the lines over and over and over again.
This is the only casting choice I don't really agree with when it comes to the movie, because it's kind of like if they cast Neville as one of J.K. Rowling's nephews or something like that. You can tell that they really didn't care for the choice of Eglantine, which is slightly disappointing. However, every other casting choice is one I love. And once again, if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't realize how rare such casting choices are, especially for animated movies. not only because they were able to keep their Australian accents,
So that's his true accent in the movie.
but also because none of these actors are celebrities. Well, not in the sense of other animated features. It happens in live action all of the time, but animated features heavily fall prey to just hiring celebrities for their fame and not to fit the characters in the story. That's how you get Beyonce as Nala and John Oliver as Zazu in the Lion King remake. People go see the movies because they like these celebrities, and the celebrities themselves don't even try all that much, and it kills the immersion of the film. You don't see Nala, you see Beyonce. You don't see Oscar, you see Will Smith. You don't see Peter Rabbit, you see James Corden. You don't see the high five emoji, you see James Corden. You don't see Biggie, you see James Corden. I'm now just realizing this is the only reason James Corden has a film career. Not only does the established fame of the voice you're hearing take you out of the picture, but the celebrity voice ends up not really acting. They're hired because they sound like themselves, not because they were the best fit for whatever character they're playing. The studio doesn't try, the actor doesn't try, and that's how you get Patrick Stewart literally playing shit. Once again, Legend of the Guardians actually tried with their casting. A fun thing to do with this film in particular is to go through each character and watch interviews with their voice actors. If Jim Sturgis used his normal tone and accent, Soren would have sounded far too old and refined.
Based off a book by Catherine Lasky called The Guardians of Garhor.
Anthony LaPaglia, on the other hand, sounds nothing like Twilight.
Full of himself and kind of very overconfident.
Charmed to meet you, dinner.
I mean, Mrs. P.
This wouldn't be happening to me if I had a family of boys.
And David Wenham is completely different from both his natural voice and the fact that he also plays Faramir in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and every single time I watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I forget that he is a digger.
The people involved in the industry are actually embracing.
To hear him play one more quote-unquote song, I'm gonna tear my gizzard out.
It's clear that Schneider and the people involved were trying to get characters out of the voice cast first and foremost, and not just the voice of the celebrities themselves. Brian Quanten had a good sarcastic tone that works well with Clad's character.
Enough stories about the Guardians.
Joel Edgerton is reveling in the pure evilness of his character, even though he sounds nothing like that in real life.
And you bug them so much that they eventually go, all right, kid, come and train with us.
Oh, you're not letting me.
Geoffrey Rush also does well with a tattered Izzarib.
How to use their gizzard.
And you can tell Ochalissa has chips on herself just by the way Abby Cornish speaks this line.
Are you going to keep interrupting me?
What a bitch. I think, once again, even though the characters aren't compelling, they were still effective. They may not be deep, but they're definitely understandable, and therefore made an impression on me. I was just entertained by the character being who they were because they were a character. 10-year-old me didn't care if they were complicated. And even looking now, it's actually quite hard to see the actor behind the performance. Even if the actor played Elrond or Alan Grant or Uncle Onwin or a female version of Prospero, you see the owl first. There's some people that probably won't even realize that Hugo Weaving plays two different characters, because Noctis's voice is warm, kind, and homely.
You know, they'll soon be grown and leaving the hollow.
Whereas Grimble sounds like my dad's.
Is there something wrong with your face?
Admittedly, maybe one of the things that keeps drawing me back to the movie is the fact that it's so Australian, and I am too. I didn't really think about it at the time, but maybe the reason I gravitated towards it as a 10-year-old is because it was the only major film I had watched that year where the characters all had the same accent as me. Come to think of it, it's really only one of the films I've seen that has primarily Australian accents. I don't think it was the driving force behind my obsession. I think I was more excited over the characters and how entertaining I found them mainly, but I wouldn't be lying if there is this weird tinge of pride and excitement I get now every single time I think about it.
Hi, Zach back here. I was wondering, do you have something against good old American actors? There don't seem to be any.
See, that's not cool.
You have to leave now.
I was blessed with an embarrassment of riches and talent and the cast that I have. Though in the past I have worked with American actors, and I find them incredibly awesome and very talented. I think the accents and the abilities of these actors sort of come together to create this perfect storm of support for the fantasy world that we've all endeavored to create. So
I do like what Zack Snyder says here, and that making the film with a lot of foreign accents led the world to feel more fantastical in a way. But I also find it weird whenever someone brings up the Australian accents as if that's the weird part about it.
Sure, mission accomplished. Might as well kick back and have a few Fosters and throw some shrimp on the Barbie. Nothing left to do here, right? The Aussie version of premature celebration is even more annoying than the American ones.
I mean, how dare they be Australian? Everybody knows that when owls really talk, it's with goddamn American accents, and that's how it's always gonna be. USA, number one. Not number two, not number three, number one, baby. God bless America and her interests. Aluminum, sidewalk, bell pepper, metal beak. USA, USA, USA. But continuing on, I think all of these collective factors in the film are reasons that 10-year-old me became infatuated with the film, and also why my enthusiasm hasn't dimmed. The movie itself has detailed, expressive animation, an appropriate use of 3D, a memorable and glorious soundtrack, voice actors who actually care, intelligent and detailed production design, and a unique visual style by a director who at least has a vision. Obviously, all of the trademarks of an awfully average film. Despite my obvious bitterment, the fact is that even if I were to give it a rating still, it would be a 6 or a 7. Yes, subjectively this is a 9 or a 10, but I'm painfully aware that most of my enjoyment of the film is me, and how I interact with the film myself. So it's this portion of the video that I really want to dive into what other people saw in it. What did the critics see? What did more intelligent audiences see that I was too young to understand? Why, despite all the effort and charm, does the movie not quite come alive like a Disney picture? Why is this only a good movie and not a great movie? What is inhibiting this movie from becoming art? It's actually pretty simple. See, it's firing on all cylinders, except one. And the problem is that if you look at all of the cylinders, this is probably the most important one. It's time to talk about the story that audiences got the day they watched the movie, which isn't the greatest.
It should have been 2 hours, I think. It's only, I think, 100 minutes.
Right. One of my real regrets in this movie is the movie's about an hour and a half long, I think. And honestly, I probably could have watched it for about 3 hours.
I definitely think characterization is its strongest element instead of character. These are people I understand, yet they don't feel compelling. As I've said before, you immediately understand Digger by the way he moves and talks. You immediately understand Twilight by the way he moves and talks. Same goes for Izzarib, Metalbeak, and even Jat and Jut. They're fun to watch, but there isn't much to talk about when it comes to compelling emotional character-driven scenes, mainly because there really aren't any. Same goes with the plot. You get it, but you don't really feel it. The journey to the tree doesn't have that weight to it. Soren actualizing himself is beautiful and striking, but do you feel good for Soren in that moment in the same way you do for Luke at the end of A New Hope? And when it comes to the story, can you even really dive into it when the plot is so heavy and fast-moving? Each scene carries so much exposition, each scene advances the plot. So many movies need scenes that just breathe. A scene where the plot can stop and the story takes center stage. This is Frodo's talk with Gandalf in the Mines of Moria. This is Han and Leia falling in love in Empire. This is the ice cream scene in Jurassic Park. Even with Marvel movies you can see it. No Way Home goes beyond simple fan service when they put all three Peters together and they talk to each other about the tragedy they each have experienced. And Infinity War goes beyond a simple space opera by having a 1500-year-old Norse god talk to a 4-foot alcoholic raccoon with a Brooklyn accent about his feelings and still making you believe what's on screen. Nothing moves forward, yet something is still gained. The fact is that with Legend of the Guardians, because the plot is so busy, the themes are sacrificed in the process. When you look at a story, sometimes the theme is most important, and Lasky has plenty in the original source material. In the book, the main good and evil being fought are two different ideologies. It's both about intelligence overcoming ignorance as well as hope overcoming doubt. The book version of St. Aggie's and the Pure Ones are separate entities, and Lasky takes that happy accident and uses it to craft a story. St. Aggie's isn't really a villainous place, it's an idiotic and absurdist one. The name of the place to begin with doesn't make any sense. They're not Catholic, these aren't orphans, and it's not an educational institution. The sleep march has no sleeping in it, and laughter therapy, something that doesn't show up in the movie, just involves plucking out young owls' feathers if they ask a question. It isn't killing Soren and Gylfi, but the place is trying to strip them from everything that makes them them. It's that critical thinking that they want to strip away, because it's the critical thinking and scheming that eventually gets them out. The theme of hope, which again is where people think this is a ripoff of Star Wars for no reason, is found in scenes like the Moon Scalding Chamber, where Soren whispers the legends of Garhol to Gylfi as they narrowly avoid getting brainwashed. And it's only because they were thinking about the legends themselves that they didn't succumb to it. This is why the title of the series is Guardians of Garhol, even though the titular Guardians of Garhol don't show up in any way during the first book. Lasky's basically telling us that the existence of their legends is just as, if not more important, than their actual existence. The point of the story is that in order to beat evil, you have to think about the world around you critically. That's what the legends are about. Lasky's heroes are both warriors and scholars. They beat the pure ones at the end, not because they can really fight, but because they know how to use mu metal, which I just discovered wasn't something Lasky just made up. Given its shorter runtime, the movie only really touches on the hope beating out doubt thing, or the altruism beating out the cynicism angle.
There's nothing wrong with dreams. Well, that's the difference between us, brother. I have mine when I'm asleep. Now would you just go to sleep?
In short, this is where the thesis and the antithesis lie. Soren and Clud both come from one of the most well put together nuclear families seen in fantasy, and yet they turn out so different. Why? Simple. Soren is hopeful and altruistic, and Clud doesn't believe in anything. The movie suggests that Soren's altruism and faith that the Guardians are real is why he escapes the villain's clutches and reaches the Great Tree.
Oh, my dreams are what make me strong, Clud. They led me to the Guardians.
Meanwhile, Clud doesn't believe in the legends because he is devoid of hope, and is instead cynical. That's why he falls to the ranks of the Pure Ones. He dislikes the world so much, he decided to be an active part of bringing it all crumbling down.
A pity there won't be any Guardians left after today.
This would be a compelling angle and something to talk about if the Guardians themselves were treated a little bit better in the movie. I really think that Soren is far too obsessed with the Guardians.
But I am Lies of Keel. I'm ready.
Well, young Guardian,
I'll stay inside and play Battle of the Ice Claws again. Picture myself standing on a great cliff with the Guardians.
If you actually read the first book, Soren is aware of the legends that his father tells him, but those are only one of many different things Soren is curious about, because he's only 2 weeks old and he doesn't really know anything. And unlike other fantasy protagonists, where they all want something, or have something missing in their life, Soren's life is actually overly complete. Luke wants to get off of Tatooine, Harry wants to get away from his family. Simba sings a whole song about wanting to just be king. If Soren had that song, his would be, I just want everything to stay the same. The point of the story being that when he's thrusted into the uncomfortable situation of St. Aggies, he critically reflects on the legends of Garhul in order to get out of it. Instead of myth important to instilling morals deep within you like in the books, the movie has the legends come across as simple fables meant to distract children. Instead of being debated literature like the events of the Bible or King Arthur, the movie makes believing in the legends unintentionally feel like you're a Star Wars fan or something like that. When Clud is dismissed for not believing in them, to some it feels like he's being shunned by his family for not believing the Easter Bunny is real. The actual point was to illustrate if you don't have a respect for the things around you, or really an opinion or response to them, you're doomed to make the world an inferior place with your lack of understanding. The moon scalding chamber scene from the book is extremely important to the thematic world of the story because of this. It was Lasky arguing the power of storytelling itself, and I really think that if the movie were slower and tried to adapt less, including such a scene would have given the movie a poignant thematic edge. The journey to the tree feels more natural in the book for many different reasons. Let's look at the movie. Soren gets told by Grimble to find the Guardians, and so they do, which means Gylfi and Soren immediately try and find the Holy Grail instead of checking in to see if their parents were even alive.
What are we gonna do now, Soren?
We're gonna find the Guardians of Garhul.
In the book, they actually do go back home, and it's only after the characters find out they can't go back home that they decide to think of the tree as a viable option. Gylfi doesn't talk about her parents at all during the movie, and Digger and Twilight seem to be some older, kookier, slightly gay-coded couple that decide to tag along the journey. Meanwhile, in the book, Gylfi's parents also disappear. Twilight was orphaned so early on in his life that he not only has his own school name for it, but can't remember the faces of his parents, and you see Digger realize he's an orphan in the same chapter that they decide to form the band and head to the tree. So at the very end of the last chapter for the first book, when our characters finally decide to explicitly look for the tree, it feels natural and understandable because it's the last-ditch effort by some lost kids based entirely on hope because they don't have anywhere else to go. It's hope in the face of a world that is becoming cynical and ignorant. That hope comes from the legends.
I can feel it in my gizzard!
If the tree isn't there, they'll continue on to the next effort. The Guardians being real is kind of just a bonus. On top of this, the pacing of the movie also hurts the believability.
This movie is all journey and no destination. Now take you to the sudden council meeting already in progress. Seriously, this story pounds ahead so haphazardly that I feel like I've been narratively penetrated without lubricant.
The Guardians are seen as this ethereal entity no one really knows or has seen, yet the time Soren and the band take to get there is nothing. In the book, Not only is the last part of the first book them trying to traverse the world, but the first portion of the second book is about that also. This part of the story really should feel like Stand By Me mixed with a religious pilgrimage. It's Fellowship of the Ring, but is a coming-of-age tale as well. The book then details these trials, big and small, as they go to the tree. Big fights such as killing a bobcat and almost losing themselves in the Mirror Lakes, and getting blown off course and meeting up with Puffins. Book 2 opens with Twilight thinking he could traverse the group during the day, which leads to the band getting swarmed by crows, and him realizing that maybe he isn't a good leader even though he's the most practically minded of the group, which then also leads to one of my favorite chapters, Twilight on the Brink, which is where he opens up to Soren about how he truly feels about his upbringing. And if developed correctly, such a scene would have worked on the screen. During the journey to the tree, the band also runs into 2 different owl couples, which sounds absolutely boring, but it's more to illustrate the fact that this world doesn't care about what our main characters are doing, while also alluding to the normalcy every member of the band was stripped of, given that they're all orphans. These adult couples don't know that St. Aggies are kidnapping owlets, but they also seem to not care that 4 orphaned owls from completely different species are making their way to a tree that might not exist in the middle of the ocean as well. It's to show that the band still persists that the tree is there, even if the world doesn't. It's not about the Easter Bunny being real, it's more about being so firm in your own beliefs that you seek its existence on your own. Meanwhile, the movie only has around 20 minutes to adapt everything. Digger, Twilight, and Mrs. P are all introduced in the same scene, which directly happens after Soren and Gylfi land for the first time since escaping. You don't know where this is, but you know that they need to get to Holmir. Mrs. P then tells Soren that his parents are still looking for him.
We need to get you home. Your parents are so worried.
And that should probably remind Soren that his parents still exist, but instead they continue on their sacred mission. Digger and Twilight join in, but not because they too are misfits that lack purpose or direction, but instead just because they're so lonely.
Do not leave us here.
Yes, you're the first new souls that we've seen in 8 moons.
I mean, Twilight knows the way, even though he doesn't know how it's pronounced.
To the Sea of Hula Dance. Hulamir!
Which makes him very trustworthy. After lifting off and going away, we check in with Clud to update the audience that he's still a dick. We then get Digger telling a joke and then Twilight singing the band to sleep. And a Tasmanian blue gum as well. Ha! Australia. We then get what you could say is the last chapter of the capture, mixed in with the first chapter of the journey. This is where we first understand that the group is the band after a mobbing of crows.
That in time would become a family, and a family needs all of its members to play their parts. The warrior, the tracker, the navigator, the leader, the heart.
He then tells them where to go and informs them that
you're halfway there!
Once again, another quotable line that I'll always remember. The only problem is that it's completely false. In the very next scene, they reach Garhol. They weren't halfway there, they were 5 minutes away. The world just doesn't seem to make sense in this way. The tree feels too easy to find, and you don't know how long this journey really has been taking place. Has it only been 1 day, or has it been several? The movie loses itself, and so in this way, the immersion breaks. Mainly for adults. Again, 10-year-old me was just eating all of this up. You could argue that a pretty big part of such thematic weakness might be because it's a Snyder movie, and I would actually agree with such a take. His movies really prove that Zack is pretty amazing at cinematography, but when it comes to character and themes, his movies don't have the best track record.
The more films I saw, I began to feel like while I was engaged with what was happening visually, I wasn't engaged emotionally. It was all kind of just passing in front of me, and I didn't really feel a part of it.
He has weird ideas, but also the conviction to get those weird ideas on screen. It's why his Superman is brooding and miserable, and why his Batman kills people, whilst also deciding to help Superman on the sole fact that their mothers have the same name. Like the Guardians, you can dissect the attempt at an enriching story, yet it's always the execution that fails. It's why he's so divisive as a director. He attempts themes and big ideas, but then never follows through in the most logical sense. And it's why it's so hard to like a movie that he makes sometimes. Some people get it, and some people don't, and that's where the argument is. This movie will always be special and my favorite of his career, but I can't help agree that the film is a bit strange because Snyder is a bit strange. How do I know such strangeness exists in Garhol? This scene.
Is that your mark?
Yes.
You wrote the Chronicle of the Battle of the Ice Claws. What, as a scribe?
I guess you could say leader of all the soldiers.
You're Lies of Keel.
My days as lies are well behind me.
Because Lies of Keel was my hero. You're just not...
So what did you expect?
To me, this is completely something Snyder added. There really isn't a correlating scene from the book that matches this,
Some Tyto Alba with gleaming armor and battle claws, the moon rising behind him. It's not glorious, it's not beautiful, it's not even heroic. It's merely doing what's right.
And I get what they're trying to go for. If you consider Legends of the Guardians a coming-of-age tale, which the books definitely are, that this is the scene where the character grows up and realizes he was being childish. Once again, Snyder has this theme and a character moment that could be compelling and interesting, and then performs it in the weirdest way possible. Izurib has a character has always been intellectual and serious. He's just like Yoda in the sense that he's a mentor that doesn't physically look like a war hero, but is everything that encapsulates a war hero. And this is kind of like a scene where Yoda tells Luke to give up on the Force. I can't really see his book version telling Soren to stop fantasizing myths, especially since this is Garhul, a place famous for being myth. So it's punishing Soren for being altruistic, which is the thematic light side of the movie. So the audience may become confused. Is it good to be altruistic or is it bad?
What did you expect? Some Tyto Alba with gleaming armor and battle claws? The moon rising behind him?
It made the film more confusing, and it led to reviews comparing Legend of the Guardians to robots of all films.
The best way to explain this is that you take blue skies as robots and you make it darker and put in owls.
Now, I love me some robots, but Legend of the Guardians and robots are not the same movie. Now, I can nitpick exactly how Snyder goes when it comes to his movie adaptations, but the fact is that the movie's flaws are just very noticeable, mainly because the ones it does have are few and far between, but would basically have made the movie great if they were done better. The music is wondrous, the animation is expressive, the characters are at least not boring to watch, and the production design is well thought out. If you think about it, the only thing really holding the movie back is the writing and story. And the reason it's short and forgettable isn't because the writers can't write or that Snyder was a part of the direction. The singular fault lies solely on the adaptation philosophy. I haven't really focused on it, but the movie is based on the first 3 books of the original series. But then let's think about it. This movie is an hour and a half long, and this book is 600 pages. Think about it in another way. There are 73 chapters collectively made up, and only 96 minutes of the movie. That's kind of a terrible ratio to have. And it means you're kind of writing yourself into a corner when it comes to the adaptation, because it means that you're needing to write more than 1 chapter's worth of story in 1 minute, which leads to the thematic incoherence and the cheap answers that the story has. This movie really is the reverse Hobbit trilogy. Whereas that was a 300-page book stretched against its will into a 9-hour trilogy that moved at a snail's pace, this is a trilogy of books condensed into a runtime of an episode of BBC Sherlock, a movie that also has Schneider and therefore slow motion. Most of the flaws in the movie are in the plot and story and how the characters interact with it. Most of these flaws come to fruition within the adaptation. They needed to make these decisions in order to cram so much in. My least favorite writing decisions in this movie have to be the oil canister and Eglantine just having to wake up. The worst part about that oil canister, by the way, is that it's so contrived, but it's the only reason Soren frees the Guardians. Why did they have to do it? Well, it's pretty simple. You see, it was there because Soren needed to destroy the Devil's Triangle. In the book, they do it with mu metal and coal, but if you were going to use mu metal, you would need to develop the fact that mu metal resists against the magnetism of the flex, but we already took up that lesson learning time of the movie developing the weather interpretation class that Izurib teaches so that Soren and Izurib have a mentor-mentee relationship. But if we jam that in, we can't then establish the fact that the tree has classes in the first place. So we have to establish that along with its hierarchy, and we have to do all of this after the midpoint. The midpoint has to be Soren arriving at the tree because that would feel uneven having to establish so much of the tree so late in the film. So with that, we can't have any Mirror Lakes and no demeaning Sudi owl couples with terrible pet names, and we'll condense all of that into the ethereal Echidna. We don't have any time for Twilight and Digger's separate stories and introductions, so now they live together for some reason in the middle of a swamp, and this is directly after Soren and Gylfi leave St. Aggie's about 30 minutes in, which means we only have around half an hour to establish the world of the story, the main character, and the comfort zone he exists in. We then have to do the inciting incident, establish the villain and how they operate, and then go through how Soren and Gylfi escape the clutches after only 15 minutes of being there. We're strapped for time even more so because we've added Clud's story, so we have to keep checking in with his downfall, and given that we have to do so much with every single scene, we have to really rely on easy answers and contrived plot points in order for it to be even slightly understandable, and now can't add any complexity or detail that the source material has, such as the various effects on moon blinking, the various ceremonies in a young owl's life, Soren and Gylfi learning how to fly over a period of time instead of just one day, the geography of the world itself, the practices that make St. Aggie so hellish, the macroculture of the owls outside of Garhul, and then the diverse and interesting culture of the tree itself. and then the shenanigans of the second book that make it such an endearing coming-of-age tale, the mystery behind Eglantine's reappearance, the subtlety of Soren and Isrub's father and son relationship, and the extra place names, our words, and occurrences that the movie just couldn't put in. There's a lot lost when you look at it. There's this great interview with Peter Jackson in 2002 where he talks about the pitch that happened with the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Able to come up with a much more definitive budget of what it was going to spend, and it was going to, at that point, these two movies were going to cost about 130, 140 million to make. And he turned to us and said, look, you know, I've got a problem. I just cannot go ahead with these two films, so why don't we just make one? And we said, so you want us to make the first one first and release it, which is sort of the common sense approach, and then if it's successful, we'll go make the second. And he said, well, no, I just want to make one Lord of the Rings film, so we've got to figure out a way to lose all this story and to compress it all into one movie. So we didn't really feel comfortable with that at all. In fact, we just felt it was a recipe for disaster, but that anybody that had read the book that went along to a movie titled The Lord of the Rings was just going to be disappointed. Was going to be shocked at what this 2-hour version was actually going to be like. And we just said, why would you do that when it was guaranteed to disappoint?
There's a part of me that wished someone had that level of conviction during the production of this movie. Someone that knew that trying to jam 600 pages of story wouldn't make a good movie, let alone a satisfying adaptation. But then again, Legends of the Guardians isn't The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings is the second most read English language book for the 20th century, only behind the Bible. Legend of the Guardians is a movie about owls. Australian owls, for some reason.
Mythological story with owls.
So the gains weren't ever going to be that good. Not only was it the owl movie, but there was also the fact that it was animated. This movie was a fantasy movie about owls fighting each other, and it was in the same medium that is still primarily directed towards kids in Western culture. This is a family movie, sure, but it's not in the same way that other Pixar and Disney movies are.
A darker film than what Pixar and DreamWorks have sort of been doing in animation.
Right.
We sort of wanted to go back to Walt Disney, because Walt Disney's films are actually quite dark.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they're very dark.
And that is probably why I still love this movie. Sure, the story isn't as strong as its source material, and it still leaves much to be desired. But when I talk about the movie, I don't see a perfect movie. I see a great story that had to be cut down to its own plot summary. I see performances that locked into characters that just didn't go deep enough. I see visuals trying to give you an emotional response even though the setups weren't all there. I see music that supports and attracts in all the right places except for, you know, the pop music montage halfway through. I see something that could be compared to The Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, even though it's in the animation medium by a studio that isn't DreamWorks or Disney, trying to actually give animation its own fantastical epic that anyone could get behind. I see a movie so peculiar that I can't stop thinking about it. It's always going to be on my mind. This Weird Al movie has basically enveloped like 12% of my own personality. And that's how you get very long videos like this one. It's a movie that I can't stop recalling or remembering, and yet it's only 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. And when it comes to other people remembering this movie, it's basically always just been shat on. 30 Rock had a running joke on one of their episodes that compared the movie to in-flight entertainment that nobody really watches to have an experience, but instead just to pass the time.
Soren Eglantine, your journey is at an end.
Basically saying that this owl movie that people spent 4 years to make enjoyed it.
Well, that's good to hear, because it was only 4 years in the making, so...
They basically were saying that this movie was on the same level as an NPC pilot for a show that was just a Sex and the City clone.
On again.
Love and friendship, having it all, or maybe just a great pair of shoes. One of them has to be Asian. Can they be good at their job?
The Simpsons just has Bart calling the film bad.
Perfect. Bad movie, bad pun, even bad paper stock.
And really, those are the only callbacks this movie ever has. For these animators and movie makers, 4 years of their hard work ended up as people on Reddit thinking that the movie was just an invention for that episode of 30 Rock, and are genuinely surprised to find it's real when they see it on Netflix. This movie has genuinely somehow vanished from the histories of animation, where I think it should be one of its greatest experiments.
Why owls?
It didn't succeed in everything it wanted to do, but I surely wouldn't call it forgettable and something to be just washed away. People have forgotten about it, but I'm not going to. And that's good enough. And I'm just realizing that I've been writing this thing for so long, I've forgotten to at an ending. So I'm probably just going to go with this really self-aware, semi-ironic ending where I just sort of leave. And, yeah, I guess that's the video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.
This sounds like a joke, but I remember enjoying Legend of the Guardians, The Owls of Ga'Hoole, aside from one scene.
He made that?
I could probably watch that again, honestly.
Yeah, I enjoyed that movie too.
Yeah,
that's probably one of
it
my
wasn't
favorite
bad at
movies
all.
from him.
It's very odd.
It was just that one moment where things got really sappy and they could not fucking help themselves, and they put an Owl City song in the soundtrack.
Yeah, that was funny. There's an Owl City song.
Yeah, and they had that really shitty montage.
That was funny as hell.
That was the moment where I was like, this isn't good anymore. And then it got pretty, and then it was fine after that point.
No, that's some Mark Webb shit.
There's a lot of speed up slow-mo in that movie.
Yeah.
A lot of, his trademark bits.
Oh my god.
The owl's like flying in slow motion with rain.
It was cool.
It's
Yeah,
funny.
it had some cool shit.
I don't know.
It almost didn't have an audience because it was like too cool to be a kids movie at points. And then in that one montage, it's like, oh, it's a kids movie again. So, I don't know. It was fun.
Didn't they all have Australian accents or something?
I don't remember.
All Australian
I watched it in
owls.
theaters once and haven't seen it since, but
right.
I could check it out again.
Yeah, let us know how that one is now.
I'll get right on it.